The alarm screamed through every corridor of the Mercy of Talder and Veshala S. 4 hands moved across the communications console with desperate speed. Medical frigate shuddered as another blast struck the rear shields and the insectoid Chittick. Officer felt her antennae flattened against her head in fear. 147 refugees, crowded into a ship meant for 300, and every species aboard knew they were going to die. Communications officer report. Captain Thelver's voice crackled through her headset, and Eshala could hear the resignation in the old Taldorian's tone, still transmitting distress on all frequencies, Captain. Ow. She clicked back in response, and her lower hands continued adjusting. The signal boosts, while her upper hands worked, the damage control readutes ship's communications. Array was dying just like everything else on this cursed vessel. 2 weeks ago, the Mercy of Talder had been a proud Coalition medical frigate responding. 2 distress calls in the outer spiral, and now it was a flying coffin limping through hostile space, with 3 Krev Dominion destroyers hunting them like predators stalking wounded. Ran through the damaged systems, and she rerouted what little energy remained to boost the SOS signal one more time behind her in the refugee bay. She could hear the soft keening of Vexian children and the low harmonics of Taldorian elders trying to comfort them, and her antenna twitched with each sound of fear. "Ves, get me anything," the captain said, and his voice carried the weight of 800 lives he could not save. "Sir, all Coalition military vessels are minimum 15 standard days away." She reported and hated every word. The calculations were simple and brutal, and every species in the galaxy knew how to do math. A Mercy of Talder had maybe 6 hours of life support left, and the Krev destroyers would close to firing range in less than 3 help. Would not arrive in time, keep broadcasting? Captain Thelver said quietly, "Yes, sir." Veshala clicked and returned to her consoles. She had studied the Krev patterns during this war and knew what came next with terrible certainty. The Dominion did not take prisoners, and they especially did not spare refugees, and when those destroyers finally closed range, they would tear the Mercy of Talder apart with methodical efficiency. Screen suddenly showed a new contact, and Veshala's antennae perked up with brief hope before crashing back. Down with despair, 1 ship in civilian registry, and barely more than a cargo hauler. She opened the identification profile, and her translator struggled briefly with the species designation before settling on the still unfamiliar word, Human Vishal. Had heard of humans, of course, and every species in the Coalition had been briefed when the bizarre Deathworld species applied for membership 3 years ago. Primitives who came from a planet that tried to kill them constantly, and they developed strange psychological quirks as a result, and they bonded with other species inappropriately fast, and they kept pets, and they cried when animals died in their entertainment. Media strange creatures, but not relevant to our current situation, the human vessel's transponder identified it as the Frontier's Edge, and it was a cargo hauler moving through this sector on some merchant run, and according to her calculations, it could reach them in approximately 72 hours, which meant it would arrive just in time to find debris. Veshala started to dismiss the contact when her console chimed with an incoming transmission, and she activated it automatically. "Mercy of Talder, this is Captain Marcus Webb of the Frontier's Edge." A voice said in heavily accented but understandable Coalition standard, and the translation matrix flagged it as male human vocal patterns. "We received your distress call, and we are altering course to render assistance." Veshala stared at her. "Screen in confusion, Frontier's Edge, be advised, this is a combat situation." She transmitted back 3 Krev. "Destroyers are pursuing this vessel, and we have minimal defensive capabilities, and you are listed as an unarmed civilian cargo ship." There was a pause, and she heard multiple voices discussing something in the background before the human captain responded. "Yeah, we copied that, Mercy," he said, and his tone carried something her translator could not quite interpret. "We are still coming, Frontier's Edge, you do not understand." Veshala clicked rapidly, and her antennae flattened in distress. "Your vessel cannot survive engagement with Krev military ships, and you will be destroyed, and we cannot be saved in time, and your sacrifice will be meaningless." Another pause, and then a different voice came through, and this one was flagged as female human Mercy of Talder. "This is Chen from Frontier's Edge, and I just want to make sure you understand what you are saying." The woman said, "You have 800+ refugees aboard, including children, And you are telling us not to help because we will probably die trying. That is correct. Veshla transmitted and felt her body sag with exhaustion. We appreciate the gesture, but it is mathematically futile. She heard what sounded like laughter from multiple humans, and her antennae twitched in confusion. Well, damn. The woman named Chen said, "Captain, they are definitely in trouble." Agreed. The first voice said, and Captain Marcus Webb came back on the line. "Mercy of Talder, we are 3 days out at maximum burn, and we are coming, and I need you to stay alive. Until we get there, and do you understand?" Vishala felt something strange flutter in her thorax, and her translator still could not identify the emotion in the human's voice, but it was not resignation. "Frontier's edge, you should preserve your own lives." She tried one more time. "Not really our style," did the human captain said. "See you in 72 hours, and web out." The transmission ended, and Vishala sat motionless at her console, staring at the marker on her screen, showing one small human cargo ship burning toward them at speeds that would strain its engines. Captain Thelver peered beside her station, and his scaled face showed the confusion she felt. "They are coming." She told him simply, "I explained the situation clearly, and they are still coming." The old Taldorian looked at the tactical display and at the 3 Krev destroyers slowly closing range, and at the single human vessel pushing its engines beyond safe limits to reach a ship full of strangers, Deathworlders. He said quietly, "I read the briefings when they joined the coalition, and their planet kills them regularly, and they developed unusual psychological responses to constant danger. The briefings did not mention suicidal tendencies." Vishala pointed out. "No." Captain Thelver agreed. "They mentioned something else, and what was the human word they kept using?" Vishala accessed her files and found the first contact cultural analysis, and scanned through the human psychological profiles until she found it heroism. She read aloud an irrational willingness to sacrifice personal safety for abstract ideals or the protection of others. They both looked at the tactical display again and watched the small human ship racing toward impossible odds. "Keep broadcasting," Captain Thelver said. "If those insane Deathworlders are going to die trying to save us, the least we can do is survive long enough to witness it." "Yes, sir." Vishala clicked and returned to her console. 3 days, and that was all they had. 3 days to keep 847 refugees alive, and 3 days for one crew of humans to reach them, and 3 days before the Krev destroyers closed range. Her fingers flew across the controls, and she began rerouting every spare electron of power to life support systems. If humans could be irrational enough to attempt the impossible, then she could be irrational enough to believe they might succeed. Mercy of Talder flew on through the dark, and behind it the Krev destroyers closed. With patient malice and ahead somewhere in the black, one small human ship pushed its engines to braking and raced towards strangers who needed. Helvasala did not pray, and Chittik did not have gods, but she found herself hoping anyway. Let them arrive in time, and let their impossible human stubbornness mean something, and let 800 lives be worth the sacrifice. These Deathworlders seemed so willing to make. The alarm screamed on, and she kept transmitting, and somewhere in the distance, humans were coming. Marcus Webb gripped the arms of his captain's chair as the Frontier's edge dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and immediately every alarm on the bridge started screaming contact. His pilot, Sarah Chen, called out 3 Krev destroyers in formation around the Mercy of Talder, and they are powering weapons. "Get me a channel," Marcus ordered, and his engineer Rodriguez was already rerouting power before he finished speaking. The view screen flickered to life, showing 3 sleek predatory vessels circling the battered medical frigate like sharks, and Marcus felt his jaw clench. 72 hours. They had pushed the engines in 72 hours. His crew had survived on coffee and stimulants and pure stubborn rage, and they had made it. The Krev destroyers noticed them immediately, and one peeled off to face the Frontiers edge with casual contempt. "Unidentified human vessel, you are ordered to depart this area immediately," a synthesized voice announced in Coalition Standard. "This is a Krev Dominion military operation, and interference will result in your destruction." Marcus looked at his crew, and Chen met his eyes from the pilot station, and Rodriguez nodded from Engineering and their security chief Barnes just grinned, that wild grin that meant he was ready for something stupid. "This is Captain Marcus Webb of the Frontier's Edge," he said calmly. "Into the cum we are responding to a distress call from coalition civilians under fire, and we are not leaving." There was a pause, and then something that might have been laughter from the Krev officer. "Your vessel is an unarmed cargo hauler," the voice said with amusement. "You have no weapons and no military capability, and you will die in approximately 45 seconds if you do not depart immediately, Chen," Marcus said quietly, full burn to that nearest destroyer in Rodriguez. "I need you to override every safety protocol on the cargo bay doors. Captain, what are you?" Rodriguez started, and then his eyes went wide. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me. We are hauling industrial mining explosives." Marcus said 40 tons of them, and I think the Krev might not appreciate having them delivered personally. Chen's hands flew across her controls, and the Frontier's Edge lurched forward with acceleration that made the hull groan. "All hands. This is the captain," Marcus announced. "On shipwide, abandon ship in 30 seconds and get to the escape pods, and that is an order." The crew did not hesitate, and they had drilled for this exact scenario during the 72-hour burn because Marcus had told them his plan, and they had all voted to do it anyway. The Krev destroyer seemed confused by the sudden acceleration and its weapons charged, but protocols demanded a warning shot first, and that moment of hesitation cost them everything. Escape pods launching. Barnes called out as he ran for the bridge exit. "Captain, you better be right behind me 20 seconds. Marcus said, and watched the destroyer growing larger on his view screen. Krev were firing now, and energy blasts tore through the Frontiers. Edge's minimal shields, but the cargo hauler was committed, and momentum was a beautiful thing. Chen, go, Marcus ordered, and his pilot hesitated for just a second before abandoning her station. Marcus was alone on the bridge when the Frontier's Edge struck the Krev destroyer at full burn. The cargo bay doors had opened 2 seconds before impact, and 40 tons of industrial mining explosives met Krev military hull plating at velocities never recommended by any safety manual in the galaxy. Marcus had already triggered his emergency ejection seat, and the captain's chair launched him through the rapidly opening roof hatch and into space 3 seconds before the explosion turned both ships into an expanding sphere of plasma and debris. The shockwave caught him anyway and sent his ejection pod tumbling and his vision grayed out as the acceleration compensators struggled to keep him conscious. When his head cleared, he was spinning slowly through space, surrounded by his crew in their own escape pods, and the 3 Krev destroyers were in disarray. One was gone completely, and the second was venting atmosphere and tumbling out of control, and the third was backing away. With what might have been shock sound off, Marcus croaked into his suit, "Come Chen here," and that was the most insane thing I have ever seen, Captain. His pilot responded, "Rodriguez present, and sir, I am pretty sure we just violated about 18 different cargo handling regulations." His engineer added, "Barnes checking in, and I got visual on the refugee ship." Security chief called, "They are moving, and they have engine power." Marcus craned his neck in his pod and saw the Mercy of Talder beginning to limp away from the kill zone under minimal thrust. "Mercy of Talder, this is Captain Webb." He transmitted, "You need to run now, while they are confused. Captain Webb, your sacrifice was." A clicking voice started, and Marcus recognized it as the Chittick communications officer, not dead yet. He interrupted, "But you need to move, because we only bought you a few minutes." He saw the medical frigate's engines flare brighter, and it began accelerating away, and Marcus felt something in his chest unclench slightly. 100 lives, and they were moving, and they had a chance. All crew, listen up. He said, "We have weapons in our emergency kits, and when those Krev ships get their composure back, they are going to be mad, and we are going to make them madder, sir. We have hunting rifles and a plasma cutter." Rodriguez pointed out, "They have warships, and we have spite." Barnes laughed. "I like this plan." The remaining Krev destroyers were recovering and beginning to pursue the Mercy of Talder again, and Marcus pulled his emergency rifle from his pod storage and checked the charge. "Oh, wait for them to pass close," he ordered. "Aim for sensor arrays and communication dishes and anything that looks important, and make every shot count." His crew acknowledged, and they waited as the 2 Krev ships accelerated past the debris field and past the scattered human escape pods that they probably considered beneath notice now. Marcus said 7 escape pods opened fire with weapons that should have been meaningless against military warships, and 7 humans aimed with the precision of people who grew up hunting on a death world, where missing meant starving Marcuses. Rifle round punched through a communication relay, and Chen's shot took out a sensor cluster, and Rodriguez used his plasma cutter to score a line. Across a destroyer's hull, plating it was nothing, and it was everything, and it was just enough to make the Krev ships hesitate. Barnes whooped as his shot caused sparks to fly from some external system, and the destroyers began evasive maneuvers. Tasev. Mercy of Talder, you need to jump as soon as you can calculate coordinates. Marcus transmitted, we are engaging the enemy, Captain. Webb, you are in escape pods. The Chittock officer clicked back in disbelief. You are engaging with personal weapons against military destroyers. Yeah, well, we are pretty committed at this point, Marcus said, and fired again. Then his sensors detected something that made his heart jump, and multiple new contacts were appearing on his display ships, dropping out of faster-than-light travel, and lots of them, and Marcus pulled up the identification codes and started laughing. Captain, what is... Chen started, and then she saw it too. Oh, no way. 37 vessels appeared in the combat zone, and every single one was showing human registry mining ships and colony transports and cargo haulers and 1 pleasure yacht and even a deep space construction vessel, and none of them were military, but all of them were here. This is Captain Webb too. All arriving vessels. Marcus transmitted, we have refugees under fire and 2 active Krev destroyers, and I appreciate you showing up, but you should know this is probably suicide. Webb, you magnificent crazy person, this is Captain Okonkwo of the Belter's Bargain. A woman's voice responded, we heard your transmission calling for any humans in range, and we were close enough to help. And also, did you just ram a Krev destroyer with a cargo ship? Seemed like a good idea at the time. Marcus admitted, outstanding. Okonkwo laughed, all ships, this is Belter's Bargain, and we have civilians to protect, and Krev to annoy, and let us show these military types what civilian creativity looks like. The human fleet did not move in formation because they had no formation. And they did not follow military doctrine because none of them were military, and they came at the 2 remaining Krev destroyers like a swarm of angry hornets, the mining ship Belters. Bargain activated its industrial or processing laser and began cutting into the nearest Krev destroyer's engine section, and a colony transport called New Horizon started dropping its cargo of prefab buildings onto the other destroyer like improvised bombs. The pleasure yacht Sapphire Dream was broadcasting Earth's heavy metal at volumes that made Marcus's teeth hurt, and the Krev communication frequencies dissolved into static. Mercy of Talder, are you clear? Marcus called, we are jumping now, Captain Webb. The Chittock officer responded, and her voice carried wonder. Thank you, and thank your species, and we will remember this. The medical frigate vanished into faster-than-light travel, and 847 refugees escaped into the Black Marcus. Watched the civilian human fleet swarm, Krev destroyers with mining equipment and construction tools, and 1 crazy person who was apparently trying to ram them with a yacht. The surviving Krev destroyer decided that discretion was the better part of valor and jumped out, followed by its damaged companion. The human fleet hung in space, surrounded by debris and the wreckage of their own ships, and Marcus counted the losses: 20 vessels destroyed or critically damaged, and his S. Vishala stood in the observation deck of Talder Prime's orbital station and watched the news feeds scroll across every screen with mounting disbelief. The Mercy of Talder incident was everywhere, and every species in the coalition was watching the footage she had recorded and trying to understand what they had witnessed. She had spent the last 6 hours being debriefed by coalition intelligence, and then being interviewed by 17 different news networks, and then being debriefed again, because apparently the first debriefing had not been detailed enough. Her antennae twitched with exhaustion, but she could not stop watching the screens. One feed showed the moment the Frontier's Edge had rammed the Krev destroyer and the explosion that had followed, and another showed the civilian fleet arriving like some kind of insane cavalry charge. Third screen displayed graphs and analysis from military experts, K, who kept using words like unprecedented and tactically unsound, and D, Somehow effective, Officer Vishala, a formal voice said behind her, and she turned to see Council Member Thorin of the Cathora Concordat, approaching with several aides. I am told you have the most complete records of the engagement. Yes, Council Member. She clicked and gestured. To her datapad, I recorded everything from the initial distress call to our jump to safety. And you witnessed human civilian vessels engaging Krev military destroyers. Thorin said, and his crystalline features reflected the screen light in patterns she could not read. Yes, sir. Vishala. Confirmed 37 civilian ships responded to Captain Webb's call for assistance. Madness, Thorin muttered. Absolute madness. And they lost 22 vessels and 43 crew members. And for what? Purpose to save 847 refugees, sir? Vishala said quietly, strangers they had never met. Thorin's colors shifted in what she recognized as agitation. The Kithra Concordat will be proposing restrictions on human expansion at tomorrow's council session. He said they are clearly dangerous primitives with no regard for calculated risk assessment. He walked away before she could respond, and Vishala returned to watching the screens. Another feed showed interviews with the rescued refugees, and a Vexian mother held her child, while explaining how she had watched humans sacrifice themselves, and the translator struggled with her. Emotional harmonics, they came when no one else could. The Vexian said they came and they did not ask for anything and they just helped. Vishala felt her thorax tighten and pulled up her own analysis files that she had been compiling during the journey to Talder Prime. She had watched the footage hundreds of times and tracked every ship movement and every decision point in every moment where the humans could have chosen to preserve themselves, but instead chose to advance. The mathematics made no sense from any survival standpoint, but they made perfect sense from a completely different perspective. Officer Vishala. Another voice called, and she turned to see Captain Thelver approaching with someone she did not recognize. This is Ambassador Karish from the Taldorian High Council, and he wishes to speak with you. The ambassador was old even by Taldorian standards, and his scales showed the deep blue of high rank. I have read your preliminary reports. He said you have been studying human psychology since the rescue. Yes, Ambassador. Vishala confirmed. I am trying to understand their decision-making process, and have you succeeded? Karish asked. Vishala pulled up her files and displayed them. On a nearby screen, the Coalition has been analyzing humans incorrectly. She said, we ask questions like, can they survive extreme conditions? And how do they handle stress? And what are their physical capabilities? Reasonable questions for evaluating a species from a death world. Ambassador observed. Yes, but we are asking the wrong questions. Vishala insisted, and her antennae waved with emphasis. We should be asking what happens when you threaten something humans have decided to protect. She pulled up footage of the Frontier's Edge accelerating toward the Krev destroyer. Captain Webb calculated the odds of success. She explained his crew knew they would likely die, and they voted unanimously to proceed anyway. Irrational, Kirsch said. But his tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. Only if you assume survival is their primary calculation variable. Vishala clicked, but it is not, and humans do not optimize for personal survival when something they care about is threatened, and instead they optimize for protecting the threatened party, regardless of cost to themselves. She brought up more data showing the civilian fleet's response patterns when Captain Webb called for help. 37 civilian ships altered course. She continued, none of them had military training, and most of them had families waiting for them, and all of them knew the risks, and they came anyway because humans were threatened. Ambassador Kurish suggested, no sir. Vishala corrected, because refugees were threatened, and the refugees were not human, and most of them had never even met a human before, and the humans came anyway. The ambassador was quiet for a long moment. You are suggesting humans have extended their protective instincts beyond their own species. He finally said, I am suggesting humans will extend their protective instincts to anything they perceive as worthy of protection, Vishala said, and their threshold for what qualifies as worthy appears to be remarkably low, and they bond rapidly with other species, and they adopt causes that do not benefit them, and they have a word they use. She pulled up the translation file. Underdog. She read it refers to the party they will support regardless of logic or benefit to themselves, and especially if that party is weaker or threatened or in need of help. Dangerous. Karish murmured extremely. Veshala agreed, but perhaps not. In the way Council Member Thorin believes. She changed the display to show strategic analysis. The Krev Dominion has been winning this war through calculated aggression and superior force projection, she explained. Their doctrine assumes rational actors who will retreat when odds are unfavorable and they target civilians, specifically because defending them spreads coalition resources too thin. And humans do not retreat when odds are unfavorable. The ambassador said with growing understanding, "No, sir, they advance." Veshala confirmed, and they do not view civilian protection as resource drain. They view it as primary objective, and the Krev have no tactical response to opponents who treat their own survival as secondary to protecting others. She pulled up the footage of the pleasure yacht Sapphire. Dream broadcasting music while running interference patterns. These were not soldiers, sir. She said this was someone's vacation vessel and the owner flew it into combat against military warships and survived purely through audacity and luck, and because the Krev could not predict what someone that irrational would do next, Ambassador. Karish studied the screens with his deep blue scales shifting in thought patterns. You believe humans could change the course of this war? He said, I believe humans already have. Veshala responded. Every species in the coalition is watching this footage and seeing civilians charge into impossible odds to save strangers, and the Krev are watching too and calculating new threat assessments. She brought up her final analysis. The question before the council should not be whether to restrict human expansion. She said the question should be whether we are prepared to accept the kind of allies who will ram destroyers with cargo ships to save our civilians. The council meets tomorrow. Ambassador Karish said, you will present this analysis, sir. I am a communications officer. Veshala protested. You are the person who was there, the ambassador corrected. You watched humans sacrifice themselves for your ship, and you have spent 6 hours analyzing. Why? And the council needs to hear this from someone who witnessed it. Personally, he turned to leave and then paused. Officer Veshala, do you believe we should accept a full military alliance with humanity? He asked. Veshala thought about Captain Ebb's voice saying they were coming, and about 37 civilian ships appearing like some kind of miracle, and about 43 humans who died saving strangers. I believe we already chose our answer when we broadcast that distress signal. She said we just did not know what would respond. The ambassador's scales shifted to a color she recognized as approval, and he departed with his aides. Veshala returned to the observation deck windows and looked out at Talder Prime spinning below. Tomorrow the council would debate and argue and calculate political costs and strategic benefits and all the rational things that governments did, but somewhere in coalition space, human civilian ships were still moving through their routes and still listening to distress calls and still ready to alter course if someone needed help. The coalition High Council chamber was built to accommodate 17 different species, and right now all of them were talking at once. Marcus Webb stood in the center of the circular floor with his surviving crew members and tried not to look. As uncomfortable as he felt, Chen stood to his left in her best clean jumpsuit, and Rodriguez to his right still wearing a medical brace from injuries sustained during the pod recovery, and Barnes behind them all grinning like this was the best entertainment he had seen in years. Order. Council Speaker Mavet called, and the chamber slowly quieted. We are here to address the incident involving the medical frigate Mercy of Talder and the human vessels that intervened. Council Member Thorin of the Kithra Concordat said, and his crystalline body flashed with agitation, they attacked Krev military vessels with civilian ships, and they violated every engagement protocol in the SC Coalition Charter, and they demonstrated complete disregard for calculated risk assessment. Saved 847 lives. Ambassador Karish of Talder countered lives that would have been lost if they had followed proper protocols at the cost of 43 human lives. Thorin shot back, and 22 vessels destroyed, and who knows how many more damaged beyond repair, and this is not sustainable tactics. This is suicide with extra steps. Marcus cleared his throat, and the entire chamber fell silent. Permission to speak, he said, and kept his voice level. Council Speaker Mavet's fins rippled in what might have been amusement. Captain Webb, you are not on trial here. She said, you may speak freely then. With respect, Council Member Thorin, you do not understand what happened out there. Marcus said we did not attack Krev vessels, we defended Coalition civilians, and there is a difference, semantics. Thorin dismissed. No, sir, it is the whole point. Marcus insisted you were asking why we would risk ourselves for strangers and you are calculating costs versus benefits, and you are missing the fundamental reality. He gestured to his crew. We did not sit down and do a cost-benefit analysis before responding to that distress call, and we heard people needed help. And we were close enough to do something, and that was the entire calculation, but you knew you would likely die. Thorin pressed. Yeah, probably. Marcus agreed. And we went anyway, because that is what you do when someone needs help, and you were the only option available. Councilmember Vrithra of the Serpents Collective spoke up, and her scales rippled with patterns Marcus's translator could not fully interpret. Captain Webb Humanity has been part of the Coalition for only 3 years. She said, you have no military obligations to us, and no formal treaties requiring mutual defense, and yet 37 civilian vessels responded to your call, 38, if you count mine. Marcus corrected, we are a civilian shipping company, and our contracts do not include combat operations. Vrithra continued, how did you convince so many of your people to risk death for strangers? I did not convince anyone. Marcus said, I broadcast a message saying refugees were under fire, and any humans in range were needed, and they came on there. Owen and I was honestly surprised so many showed up. Why did they come? Vrithra asked. Marcus thought about how to explain it, and looked at Chen, who shrugged, and Rodriguez, who was nodding, and Barnes, who just kept grinning because they are human. Marcus finally said, and humans have this thing where we hear someone needs help, and we just kind of go help, and it does not matter if we know them, or if they are our species, or if it makes sense strategically, and we just go, that is not a rational basis for military doctrine? Thorin said flatly, no, it is not. Marcus agreed, but it is a pretty good basis for living. The chamber erupted in discussion again, and Marcus waited while various council members argued about human psychology and military integration and political ramifications. Then a new voice cut through the noise. I would like to address the council, Vishala said, and Marcus saw the Chittick communications officer standing at one of the witness platforms. Council. Speaker Mavitt gestured for her to proceed. I have spent the last 4 days analyzing the Mercy of Talder incident. Veshala began, and I have compiled tactical data and psychological profiles and strategic assessments, and I believe the Council is asking the wrong questions. She activated a display showing the battle footage. The question is not whether humans are too dangerous to integrate into Coalition military operations. She said the question is whether the Coalition is prepared to fight the kind of war that humans excel at. Explain. Ambassador Kurish prompted. The Krev Dominion has been winning through calculated aggression and superior force projection. Vishala clicked rapidly. They target civilians because defending them spreads our resources too. It's thin, and they assume rational actors, who will retreat when odds are unfavorable, and their entire doctrine is built on predictable behavior. She changed the display to show the civilian fleet's approach. Humans are not predictable. She continued, they do not retreat when odds are unfavorable, they advance. They do not calculate acceptable losses for themselves. They calculate acceptable risks for protecting others. And the Kriv have no tactical response to this. You are suggesting we weaponize human irrationality? Councilmember Thorin said with clear disapproval, I am suggesting we accept allies who will ram destroyers with cargo ships, if that is what protecting civilians requires, Vishala corrected. And I am suggesting that the Krev Dominion is currently recalculating every tactical assumption they have made about Coalition defensive capabilities. She pulled up intelligence reports. Krav communications traffic has increased by 300% since the incident. She said they are analyzing the footage and running simulations and trying to develop doctrine for engaging human forces, and they cannot because humans keep doing things that should not work. Marcus found himself nodding along with her analysis. The pleasure yacht. He said, excuse me, Captain Webb. Council Speaker Mavet prompted the Sapphire Dream. Marcus clarified someone flew their vacation yacht into combat and started broadcasting Earth's heavy metal to jam Krev communications, and that should not have worked, but it did because who plans for that exactly? Vishala clicked with enthusiasm. Human tactics are not replicable by other species, because they require a psychological framework. Protecting others is valued above personal survival, and most species do not have that framework. Most species are not from death worlds where everything tries to kill them constantly. Ambassador Karish observed, and most species did not develop cooperation as their primary survival mechanism. Vishala added, human psychology evolved in an environment where individual survival was difficult but group survival through mutual protection was possible, and they carried that psychology into space. The chamber was quiet now, and every council member was listening. The Krev targets civilians specifically to force us into unfavorable defensive positions. Veshala said, but humans do not see defending civilians as unfavorable. They see it as the primary objective, and threatening civilians does not make humans retreat, it makes them aggressive. She displayed strategic projections. Accepts a formal military alliance with humanity, the entire calculus of this war changes. She said that Krev can no longer assume that attacking civilian targets will spread our forces. It's thin because humans will respond. And they will respond with the kind of creative aggression that cannot be predicted or countered through traditional doctrine. You are asking us to accept allies who might do anything. Thorin said, I am asking you to accept allies who will do anything to protect those under their care. Vishala corrected, there is a significant difference. Council Speaker Mavet looked at Marcus and his crew, Captain Webb, if the coalition offers humanity a formal military alliance, what would be your terms? She asked. Marcus laughed and shook his head. I am a cargo hauler, Captain. He said, I am not qualified to negotiate military treaties, and you should talk to actual Earth government representatives about terms, but if you were asked your opinion, Mavet pressed, then I would say we should have one term, Marquette said. If someone in the coalition sends a distress call, we respond, and we do not care about borders or politics or whose jurisdiction falls under, and if civilians are in danger. We go help, and everything else is just paperwork. That is not a term, that is a blank check. Thorin protested, yeah, it kind of is. Marcus agreed, but that is also what you are going to get, whether you formalize it or not, because humans are already here, and already listening to distress calls and already willing to help. He gestured to the display showing the civilian fleet. You can make it official and integrate us into coalition operations, or you can leave it unofficial and have random civilian ships showing up at combat zones. He said, either way, when someone calls for help, humans are going to respond, and you might as well work with us instead of trying to regulate us. The council chamber erupted into discussion again, and Marcus stepped back to let them argue. Chin leaned over and whispered, did you just tell the galactic government to accept our help, or deal with us doing it anyway, pretty much? Marcus confirmed. Outstanding, Barnes said from behind them. Admiral Krevthon of the Dominion Third Fleet stared at the intelligence report on his display and felt something he had not experienced in his 40 years of military service and certainty. The report was comprehensive and detailed and utterly disturbing. In its conclusions, 6 months since the Mercy of Taldir incident and the war had changed in ways that defied all tactical projections assessment. He demanded, and his intelligence officer Vroktel brought up the strategic displays. Coalition forces have integrated human tactical doctrine into their operations. Vroktel reported mixed species crews are demonstrating effectiveness rates 300% above previous baselines. Impossible. Krefton said the coalition species do not possess the psychological framework for aggressive engagement. They do not, sir. Greftel agreed, but the humans do, and they are teaching other species to fight, like they protect something, rather than fight to survive. The display showed engagement after engagement, where coalition forces had stopped retreating and started advancing. A Taldorian frigate with a human tactical advisor had held position against superior Dominion forces for 6 hours, while evacuating a colony, and when the Dominion fleet had tried to target the fleeing transports, the frigate had rammed Themavexian destroyer with mixed crew, had pursued a Dominion raiding party into an asteroid field that should have provided perfect ambush terrain, and emerged victorious through what the report called unorthodox, aggressive maneuvering. A Chittic mining vessel with 2 human engineers aboard had responded to a distress call on a combat zone and extracted refugees under fire using mining equipment as improvised weapons. They are learning from the Deathworlders. Crefton said quietly, "Yes, sir." Brechtel confirmed human psychology appears to be contagious when integrated into mixed species operations. Crefton pulled up the psychological analysis section and read with growing concern. Humans bond with other species rapidly. He read aloud, they extend protective instincts to non-human crew members, and they adopt causes that do not benefit them personally, and they have demonstrated consistent willingness to accept casualties in defense of civilians. The coalition has been compiling data on human behavior patterns. Vrachtel added, they call it the underdog effect, and humans will support any party they perceive as weaker or threatened regardless of strategic benefit, exploitable. Crefton said, we threaten the weak, and the humans reveal themselves attempting protection. That was our initial assessment, sir, Vrachtel said carefully. It is proven incorrect. The display changed to show tactical projections threatening civilians does not draw humans into unfavorable defensive positions. Vrachtel explained it activates aggressive protective response, and humans become more dangerous when defending others, not less. Crefton studied the data and felt his certainty crumbling. Dominion doctrine had always been simple and effective, and they struck fear into civilians and targeted the weak and forced defenders into impossible choices, and rational actors retreated when costs exceeded benefits, but humans were not rational actors. Civilian response patterns. Crefton, demanded Vrachtel, brought up more disturbing data. Human civilian vessels continue to respond to distress calls in combat zones. He reported, we have documented 173 incidents of civilian intervention in the past 6 months, and success rate is approximately 60%, and the other 40%. Crefton asked, die trying, sir, Vrachtel said, and other humans respond to their distress calls, and the pattern continues. The display showed a recent incident where a human medical transport had positioned itself between a Dominion cruiser and a refugee convoy and broadcast a message that Crefton's translators struggled to interpret. They told us to shoot them first. Vrachtel explained, they said, if we wanted the refugees, we would have to go through them, and they meant it literally. Did we engage? Crefton asked. No, sir, Vrachtel said. The cruiser captain reported that destroying the medical ship would have triggered response from human vessels in adjacent sectors, and the tactical benefit did not justify the risk. Crefton felt something cold settle in his core. We are avoiding engagement with human protected assets. He said, yes, sir. Vrachtel confirmed recommendation from tactical analysis is to avoid confrontation with any coalition force that includes human elements or operates in sectors with known human presence that is half the coalition territory. Crefton protested, yes, sir. Vrachtel agreed. The admiral studied the reports and the projections and the psychological profiles and saw the pattern emerging. Dominion had been winning through calculated aggression, and now they were calculating themselves into paralysis because humans did not respond to aggression the way every other species did. What is their weakness? Crefton demanded. There must be an exploitable vulnerability. Vrachtel pulled up the final section of the report, and Crefton read with growing horror, humanity's weaknesses is other species. The report concluded they bond rapidly and form protective attachments, and they will sacrifice themselves for non-human allies without hesitation. Then we target those allies. Crefton said, the report continues, sir? Vrachtel prompted. Ruthin read the next section, but threatening those allies does not neutralize the threat, it activates it. The analysis stated human protective instinct increases proportionally. To perceived danger to protected parties and threatening civilians does not make humans retreat, it makes them aggressive. Recommendation. The report concluded. Avoid engagement with human protected assets, and avoid targeting civilians in sectors with human presence, and avoid confrontation with coalition forces that include human elements, and reassess Dominion strategic objectives. In light of opponent who does not respond to traditional deterrence, Crefton closed the report and looked at his intelligence officer. They are saying we cannot win. He stated, they are saying we cannot win using our current doctrine, sir, Vrachtel corrected, and they are saying that developing new doctrine to counter human psychology would require fundamental restructuring of Dominion military operations. The admiral thought about 40 years of successful campaigns and tried to imagine explaining to high command. that they were being defeated by cargo haulers and civilian transports and species that would not even fight. 6 months ago, continue analysis. He ordered, "Find me a weakness we can exploit." "Yes, sir," Rocktel said, but his tone carried no confidence meanwhile. In Coalition space aboard the rebuilt Mercy of Taldir Vashala stood before a class of new communications officers and taught them the protocols that might save lives. Human distress codes follow a specific pattern. She explained SOS is the most common, but they also use Mayday in emergency broadcasts, and you must learn to recognize them all. Ah, a young Taldorian student raised his hand. "Instructor, why do we need special training for human distress calls?" He asked, "Do they send them more frequently than other species?" "No." Vishala clicked. "But when humans send a distress call, or when they hear one, the response patterns are different from any other species." She brought up the display showing 6 months of incident reports. Humans respond to distress calls even when response is tactically inadvisable. She explained they will alter course across multiple sectors, and they will engage superior forces, and they will sacrifice resources and lives for strangers, and you need to understand this, because when you broadcast a distress call, you might get a human response. Is that good or bad, instructor? Another student asked Vishala. Thought about the frontier's edge ramming a destroyer and 37 civilian ships, appearing like cavalry and 847 lives saved? It means someone will come. She said it means you are not alone, and it means humans heard you, and they are coming, and whether that is good or bad depends on whether you need help badly enough to accept it from Deathworlders, who do not calculate odds before they act. She changed the display to show her current assignment. I am training you because the Coalition is expanding its communication networks. She explained, we are establishing protocols for mixed species operations, and we are integrating human response patterns into our emergency procedures, and you need to understand how humans think. They do not think like us. One student said, no, they do not. Veshala agreed, they think like predators who decided the best way to survive is to protect the weak, and they carried that into space. And now, when someone is in danger, humans do not run, they charge. She pulled up the final lesson, remember that? When you broadcast a distress call, you are not just sending information, you're potentially activating human protective instinct. She said, and once activated, humans will come and they will help, and they will not stop until you are safe or they are dead. And that is not hyperbole, that is documented pattern behavior. What if we do not want human help? A student asked. Then you do not broadcast distress, Vishala said simply. But if you are in danger and you need help and you send that call, then you accept whatever response comes, and if humans respond, you accept that they might do insane things to save you. The class ended and her students filed out discussing human psychology and protective instincts and tactical irrationality.